You know that moment when your daughter stands up at her wedding reception, grabs the mic, and decides it's the perfect time to roast you in front of 200 guests? Yeah, that happened to me. But what happened next? Let's just say the room went from laughing at me to dead quiet in about 30 seconds. Before we go any further, if my story has found you, hit subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to see just how far my words can travel. Picture it. A gorgeous wedding hall, crystal chandeliers sparkling, everyone dressed to the nines. My daughter Emily looked breathtaking in her white gown, and my heart swelled with pride watching her marry the love of her life. Everything about the reception felt perfect, until she took the microphone. I figured she was about to thank us all and maybe share a sweet little moment. Instead, she grinned at the crowd and said, "So, I want to talk about my mom for a minute. She's going through what I guess you'd call a late-life crisis." The room chuckled. She went on, "At 60 she suddenly decided she wants to build an empire." She even did the air quotes with her fingers, which only made the laughter louder. She said we kept telling her to act her age, but she never listens. And there I was, sitting there with a smile plastered on my face, absolutely dying inside while 200 people laughed about my so-called midlife crisis. But here's the part nobody in that room knew, not even my daughter. While they all laughed at the crazy old lady, chasing some silly business dream, the most powerful person in that entire ballroom was sitting quietly at table 6. Because what happened next involved Emily's brand new husband's boss standing up, nearly choking on his champagne, staring right at me in shock, and blurting out 5 words that changed my life forever. Now, if you want to understand how my daughter's wedding turned into one of the most satisfying moments of vindication I've ever had, I need to take you back. Back 2 years earlier when this whole journey began. At the time I was Linda Parker, 60 years old, recently divorced, and honestly, feeling pretty lost. After 30 years as an office manager, I got laid off when the company restructured. Which, let's be real, usually means older, higher-paid workers get replaced with younger, cheaper ones. For the first time in decades, I was completely on my own. Emily was 32, living with her fiancé, Ryan. My ex-husband had remarried a woman 15 years younger, because apparently that's what men do when they're the ones having a midlife crisis. Me. I was sitting alone in a small apartment, staring at the walls, wondering what the heck I was supposed to do with the rest of my life. Here's the thing about being 60 and suddenly unemployed. You've got 2 choices. You can believe your best years are behind you, or you can decide all those decades of experience might actually count for something. I went with option 2. I launched a consulting business helping small companies with operations and efficiency. Nothing flashy, just putting to use the skills I'd built over 30 years of keeping offices running smoothly. I called it LP Solutions. Clean, professional, and it kept my personal name out of it. But the problem? Nobody in my family took me seriously. Emily would roll her eyes whenever I mentioned landing a new client. "Mom, you're 60, not 23. Maybe it's time to act your age," she'd sigh. Ryan was even worse. He'd mansplain basic business ideas to me like I was a kid playing dress-up. "Have you thought about just getting a regular job instead of this entrepreneur phase?" he'd ask. And my sister? She'd shake her head at family dinners and say, "Linda, you missed your chance." Everyone kept telling me the same thing. Just accept it, find something steady, stop chasing dreams. Even my closest friends, who I know meant well, couldn't help throwing comments that stung. They'd smile and say, "It's cute that you're trying, but honestly, how much can you really achieve starting over at your age?" And here's the thing that burned the most. I wasn't failing. I was thriving. My clients were doing better than ever, my contracts were stacking up, and for the first time in my life I was making more money than I ever had in that office manager job. But whenever I shared good news with my family, they'd just pat me on the head like I was a toddler who'd managed to tie her own shoes. During this time, Emily was deep in wedding planning, and she made it crystal clear that she didn't want me talking about my little business to Ryan's colleagues. "Please don't embarrass me by telling people you're an entrepreneur," she begged. "Just say you're between jobs or something." I agreed because I love my daughter and I wanted her wedding to be flawless. But sitting there listening to her friends make cracks about my so-called midlife crisis, all while I quietly paid for half the wedding costs they assumed came from my divorce settlement, I started to see things differently. It wasn't just that my family didn't support me. They were ashamed of me, for daring to stand out, for refusing to fade quietly into middle-aged invisibility. And that kind of hurt cut deeper than being laid off ever did. When the wedding day finally came, it was gorgeous. Emily had picked this stunning venue, sparkling chandeliers, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a lush garden. I'd helped pay for more than a little of it, though she assumed every dollar came from my ex-husband's settlement rather than the business I'd built from scratch. That morning I chose my outfit carefully. Classy, not flashy. Elegant but not stealing the spotlight. The very last thing I wanted was to outshine the bride. Emily had reminded me again at the rehearsal dinner not to talk about my consulting work to Ryan's colleagues. Just blend in, Mom, she'd said firmly. Ryan's boss, Mr. Williams, will be there with his wife, plus a bunch of people from his tech company. They're serious business types, so please don't go on about your little projects. I swallowed my pride and nodded. Little projects, huh? The ceremony was perfect. Emily looked like an actual princess. Ryan seemed truly happy, and I cried proud, happy tears watching my daughter step into this new chapter. At the cocktail hour, I kept things quiet, chatted with family, stayed far away from the work crowd. Still, I couldn't help overhearing some of their conversations. Deals, strategies, acquisitions, they were deep into business talk. And the irony? I knew more about their sector than half of them probably did. But I just smiled politely, shook hands when introduced as the bride's mom, and said nothing. Dinner flowed smoothly until the maid of honor stood up to speak. She started sweet, sharing funny stories about Emily, gushing about how beautiful the night was. But then her tone shifted. She glanced at me with a grin and said, "Now I have to say something about the bride's family, especially her mom, who's been quite the character lately." The room chuckled and my stomach sank. She continued, "Linda's going through what you'd probably call a late-life crisis," and the laughter grew louder. At 60, she's suddenly decided she wants to build an empire. She even used finger quotes, and in that moment I wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. She finished with, "We keep telling her she should act her age, but she just won't listen. She's out here trying to compete with people half her age in business," the maid of honor teased, and the laughter roared even louder. Then she added, "But hey, at least she's keeping busy instead of just gardening like normal moms her age, right?" The whole room burst out laughing. 200 people all enjoying a joke at my expense. I sat frozen, my smile plastered in place while my cheeks burned with humiliation. And as Emily's friend wrapped up with, "We love our delusional mom anyway," the room applauded and laughed even harder. But honestly, the speech itself wasn't even the worst part. The real gut punch was watching Emily's face. She wasn't shocked. She wasn't embarrassed. She was laughing too, nodding along like every cruel word was completely fine. When her maid of honor finally sat down, Emily stood up to give her own speech. I thought, just for a second, that maybe she'd smooth things over, say something kind, balance it out. Instead, she doubled down. "Thanks for that, Amy," she said into the mic. "Yes, my mom has definitely been on a little adventure lately. She keeps insisting she's building a business empire, but really, we're just trying to get her to accept that some dreams have expiration dates. When you're past 60, maybe it's time to be realistic about what you can actually accomplish." The room exploded in laughter again. Ryan's colleagues were practically in tears, clutching their stomachs. Mr. Williams sat there shaking his head with this amused grin. Even the servers were stifling giggles as they cleared plates. I wanted to run. I wanted to disappear. More than anything, I wanted my daughter to stop humiliating me, on what was supposed to be one of the happiest days of both our lives. But Emily didn't stop. She went on, "We support Mom's little hobby anyway, even if it means listening to her talk about client meetings and business strategies like she's some kind of CEO." The way she said it, dripping with mockery, finally cracked something inside me. This wasn't just being unsupportive. This was cruel. And she was doing it in front of everyone important to her new husband's career. People who, if they knew the truth, could have been valuable connections for my real business. As Emily wrapped her speech to thunderous applause, I felt utterly defeated. Humiliated. Heartbroken. I told myself I'd quietly slip out after dinner, maybe make up a story about not feeling well. The last thing I wanted was to cause drama at my daughter's wedding, even though she'd just shattered me in front of everyone. I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. People started coming up to my table, offering that syrupy, patronizing sympathy that made my skin crawl. "Good for you for trying something new at your age," one of Ryan's aunts said, patting my shoulder like I was a little girl who'd managed to ride a bike without training wheels. Another smiled and added, "It's never too late to chase dreams, even small ones." Someone else chirped, My neighbor started selling jewelry at 60. She made almost $300 last year. Ryan's colleagues were worse. If someone introduced me as the bride's entrepreneurial mother, they'd give a polite nod and immediately switch the subject. I could practically hear their thoughts. Oh, another middle-aged woman with a cute little side hustle. One of them even said, "That's wonderful. My mother-in-law makes crafts on Etsy. It keeps her busy." As if I were some charity case who just needed hobbies to fill my empty days. But the lowest blow came when Ryan himself pulled me aside during the cocktail hour. "Linda, thanks for being such a good sport about all the speeches," Ryan said as he pulled me aside. "I know Emily was just joking around, but I didn't want you to feel bad about your consulting thing." "Pie consulting thing?" I repeated slowly. "Yeah," he nodded. "I mean, it's great you're staying active and trying new stuff. But I just hope you're not putting too much pressure on yourself, you know? At your age, it's really more about staying engaged than actually trying to build a big career, right?" I just stared at him. This was my son-in-law, the man my daughter had chosen to build a life with, and he was basically telling me to know my place. "Ryan," I said carefully, "what exactly do you think I do?" He shrugged. "Some kind of small business consulting. Emily said you help local shops with paperwork or something, which is nice. Every little bit helps when you're starting over later in life." Local shops. Paperwork. Starting over. I nodded politely, excused myself and locked myself in the restroom stall, doing everything I could not to cry. My own family thought I was some amateur just playing business to pass the time. They had no idea. Because in the last 18 months, I hadn't just kept busy. I had acquired 6 companies. 6. Including a tech firm worth more than everything Ryan could hope to earn in his entire career. When I stepped back out, I caught Emily near the bar talking to one of her bridesmaids. "Poor mom," she was saying. "She's been so lost since the divorce. This business thing is just her way of feeling important again. We don't have the heart to tell her it's never going to be anything real." "That's so sad," her friend replied. "At least she's keeping busy instead of turning into one of those lonely moms who calls their kids every single day." "Exactly," Emily laughed. "Honestly, I'd rather have her playing entrepreneur than dating again. Can you even imagine?" They both burst out laughing. And right then something inside me shattered. This wasn't just about being underestimated anymore. My daughter truly believed I was some pathetic middle-aged woman, desperate to cling to relevance. She thought my success was a fantasy, my goals delusional, and my achievements nothing more than sad attempts to feel important. The irony was painful. While Emily worried about me becoming some clingy empty nest mom, the reality was that I had quietly built something bigger than she, or anyone else in that room, could imagine. And while she was embarrassed for her colleagues to meet her entrepreneurial mother, that same mother had accomplished more than anyone else in the ballroom. I held it together through dinner, smiling and nodding as guests offered their well-meaning but insulting advice about keeping expectations realistic for women my age. I told myself I'd slip out quietly after the cake cutting, maybe fake a headache and let the newlyweds enjoy their night without me. But then something I never expected happened. During the after-dinner mingling, Mr. Williams walked straight over to me. I'd been doing my best to avoid Ryan's boss all evening, not wanting another patronizing conversation about my supposed little hobby. "Miss Parker," he said warmly, holding out his hand. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Robert Williams, Ryan's supervisor over at Sterling Tech." "Sterling Tech." My heart skipped a beat. "It's Miss Parker actually," I replied with a calm smile. "And yes, Mr. Williams, I know exactly who you are." He smiled back. "Ryan mentioned you're in business consulting. That's wonderful. What kind of work do you do?" I looked at Robert Williams, this polite man who had no idea what was about to unfold, and I realized the conversation we were about to have was going to be very, very interesting. "Well, Mr. Williams," I said carefully, "I work in acquisitions and operational consulting. I help companies optimize efficiency and unlock their growth potential," I explained. Robert nodded politely. "That sounds fascinating. Mostly small local businesses, I assume." "Actually," I said with a steady smile, "I focus on mid-size firms in the tech sector. Companies that are ready to scale, but need strategic guidance and capital investment." His eyebrows lifted just slightly. "Really? That's pretty specialized. How long have you been working in that space?" "About 2 years seriously," I replied, though I'd been laying the groundwork long before that. Impressive, he said, though I could see in his eyes that he still pictured me dealing with tiny little projects. Have you worked with any companies I might know? He asked. I hesitated. This was the moment. I could keep deflecting or I could finally tell the truth. After everything tonight, I was too tired to hide anymore. Actually, yes, I said softly. I recently completed the acquisition of Sterling Technologies. The change in his expression was instant. His polite smile froze, then faded completely as his eyes went wide. Sterling Technologies, he repeated. Yes, I confirmed. The deal closed about 3 months ago. He stared at me, completely stunned, and I could almost see the puzzle pieces locking into place. Wait a second, he whispered. Sterling was acquired by LP Solutions. Are you saying you're L. Parker? I gave him the faintest nod. Yes. That would be me. The color drained from his face. He nearly dropped his champagne glass. You're the L. Parker. The L. Parker who acquired Sterling. That's me, I said calmly. Oh my God, he stammered. I had no idea. When Ryan told me his mother-in-law was in consulting, I thought. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly flustered. Miss Parker, I am so sorry. If I had known. It's fine, Mr. Williams, I said gently. I choose to keep a low profile. But he wasn't fine. He was practically panicking, glancing around the room where people were still laughing at my so-called hobby. This is mortifying. The way everyone's been treating you, like. He couldn't finish. Please don't worry about it, I told him. I made the choice not to correct anyone. This is my daughter's wedding day. I don't want a scene. But he shook his head, lowering his voice though his words carried urgency. With all due respect, Miss Parker, people need to know. Do you realize half the people in this room actually work for companies in your portfolio? I blinked. He was right. Looking around, I suddenly spotted executives from at least 3 firms I'd acquired in the last year. And every one of them had spent the evening treating me like some sweet, delusional woman dabbling in business. Mr. Williams, I said quietly, really, I don't want attention tonight. But he leaned closer. Ma'am, forgive me, but this is unbelievable. Your own family doesn't even know? Do they have any idea what you've accomplished? No, I admitted softly. They don't. He stared at me like he couldn't believe his ears. Your daughter doesn't know that her mother is one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the sector? She thinks, I said with a sad smile, that I have a small consulting gig helping local shops with paperwork. Local shops. His voice spiked, then he quickly lowered it again. Miss Parker, you've acquired 6 companies in 18 months. You're managing a $50 million portfolio. You're not just successful, you're a powerhouse. And as he said it, I realized people around us were starting to notice the intensity of our conversation. Heads were turning. Curiosity was spreading. Ryan kept glancing over at us with a puzzled look, probably wondering why his boss was having such a serious conversation with his hobby entrepreneur mother-in-law. Mr. Williams, please, I said quietly. I don't want to take any attention away from Emily and Ryan tonight. But I could see the conflict written across his face. As a professional, he was horrified at how I'd been treated. And as someone who understood how much reputation and respect mattered in business, he clearly couldn't stand watching me be mocked. I understand your concern for your daughter, he said finally. But Miss Parker, what's happening here isn't right. These people don't just owe you respect as a person, they owe you respect as their boss. Boss. I repeated. Yes, he said firmly. Ryan works for Sterling Technologies, which you now own. The Hendersons over there, they work for Quantum Solutions, which you acquired in January. The Patels? Data Flow Systems, your March acquisition. Half the people in this room are literally cashing paychecks from companies you control, and they're sitting here joking about your so-called midlife crisis. A wave of emotion washed over me. Vindication and sadness. Proof that I had built something real, something powerful, but also a stark reminder of just how completely my own family had misjudged me. What's even more disturbing, Robert continued, lowering his voice, is that your daughter mocked you tonight for having unrealistic ambitions. But you haven't been unrealistic at all. You've been extraordinarily successful. She just doesn't know it. By then Ryan had definitely noticed. He started heading toward us with a slightly forced smile. Everything okay here? he asked. You two look like you're having a pretty intense conversation. Robert glanced at me, clearly asking permission. I gave him the smallest nod. I was done hiding. Ryan, Robert said carefully, I was just learning more about your mother-in-law's consulting business. Oh, that, Ryan chuckled dismissively. Yeah, Linda's been dabbling in business. It's actually kind of cute how seriously she takes it. The look of horror that crossed Robert's face was almost comical. Cute, he repeated slowly. Well, you know, Ryan went on, patting my shoulder like I was a child. When people start over later in life, you've got to encourage them, even if their goals are a little optimistic. But hey, we support Mom's little venture, don't we? Robert stared at him like he had just watched someone insult the president to his face without realizing it. Ryan, he said, his voice deliberate now. I don't think you understand who you're talking about. What do you mean? Ryan asked, frowning. Robert looked at me one last time and I gave him another nod. The truth was about to come out. Your mother-in-law isn't playing at business, Ryan, he said. She is business. Linda Parker is L. Parker of LP Solutions. She owns Sterling Technologies. She owns the company you work for. Ryan's face went completely blank. What? She's not some small-time consultant helping local shops with paperwork, Robert continued. She's acquired 6 major companies in the past 18 months, including ours. Ryan, your mother-in-law is your boss's boss's boss. The moment his brain caught up to what Robert was saying was like watching a slow-motion car crash. His mouth opened and closed a few times but no words came out. That's, Ryan finally stammered. That's impossible. She drives an old Honda. She lives in a tiny apartment. She deliberately maintains a modest lifestyle, Robert finished matter-of-factly. A lot of serious investors do exactly that. It keeps them focused on business instead of lifestyle inflation, Robert explained calmly. By now, people had started to notice that something big was unfolding. Curious faces were turning toward us, whispers spreading through the room. Robert seemed to realize the secret wasn't staying secret any longer. And honestly, after the humiliation I'd endured that evening, I wasn't entirely upset about it. You know what? He said, his voice growing stronger. I think people deserve to know. Before I could stop him, he was already striding toward the microphone. Excuse me, everyone, Robert's voice boomed across the hall. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need to share something remarkable I just learned. The music cut off. Conversations died instantly. 200 people turned toward him, their eyes wide with curiosity. I wanted to sink under the table, but it was too late. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert continued, I owe someone here a very public apology. Tonight, we've all been guilty of treating Miss Linda Parker, the mother of the bride, as though she were some kind of amateur dabbling in business as a hobby. We've patronized her, dismissed her achievements, and frankly, we've been rude. The silence was suffocating. I could feel every eye in the room lock onto me. What none of us realized, Robert's voice rang louder now, is that Linda Parker is actually L. Parker, the founder and CEO of LP Solutions. She is one of the most successful entrepreneurs in our entire industry. Gasps rippled across the room. A fork clattered to the floor. I heard Emily choke out a startled sound. In just the past 18 months, Robert continued, she's acquired 6 major companies, including Sterling Technologies, where I serve as Chief Operating Officer. She has quietly built a $50 million business portfolio. His tone carried awe. While we've been treating her like she was playing dress-up, the truth is, she's been building an empire. The silence broke like glass shattering. What? Emily shrieked, her voice echoing above the crowd. People erupted into frantic chatter. I saw the Hendersons whispering in panic. These were the same people who had mocked my cute little business earlier. The Patels looked pale like they'd seen a ghost. Ryan was frozen in place, mouth hanging open like a fish out of water. And one more thing, Robert added, clearly on a roll now. Roughly half the people in this room actually work for companies Miss Parker owns. So when we've been making jokes about her unrealistic business dreams, we've essentially been mocking our own boss. That's when the true panic set in. Executives scrambled mentally, replaying every condescending comment they tossed my way that night. The man who had compared me to his crafting aunt on Etsy looked like he might throw up. And Emily, my daughter, was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. A mix of shock, disbelief, and maybe even horror. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Is this true?" Before I could open my mouth, Robert held out the microphone toward me. "I think Miss Parker should be the one to answer that question." And just like that, every single person in the room was waiting for me to speak. 200 people fell silent, waiting for me to speak. This was definitely not how I'd planned to spend my daughter's wedding reception. "Well," I began, my voice trembling just a little. "Yes. It's true. I am L. Parker of LP Solutions." Gasps rippled through the crowd again, but I kept talking, steadying my tone. "I know this comes as a shock to many of you, especially to my family. I've kept a low profile on purpose. I've always preferred to let my work speak for itself rather than chase publicity or recognition." I looked directly at Emily, who was staring at me like she didn't recognize her own mother. "Honey, I didn't tell you tonight because you specifically asked me not to. You were embarrassed by what you thought was just my little consulting hobby. So I respected your wishes and stayed quiet." "But, Mom," Emily's voice was barely a whisper. "You said you were doing small business consulting." "I never said small business consulting," I replied gently. "I said business consulting. You assumed it was small because," I paused, searching for the kindest way to say it, "because you thought I was too old and too inexperienced to accomplish anything significant." The room was so silent you could have heard a pin drop. "When you gave your speech earlier, about my late-life crisis and how I should act my age, you were talking about a business that employs over 400 people across 6 companies. When you called my goals unrealistic, you were referring to accomplishments that had already happened." Finally, Ryan found his voice. "When did?" "I had no idea. I'm so sorry for everything I said. I feel like such an idiot." "Ryan," I said calmly, "you assumed a woman my age couldn't possibly know more about business than you. That's something worth reflecting on." But the person I kept my eyes on was Emily. My daughter looked devastated, not proud, not happy for me, just horrified that she'd been so wrong and so publicly. "Mom," she whispered, her face pale. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because every time I tried to share good news, you rolled your eyes and changed the subject. You told me I was having a midlife crisis. You said some dreams had expiration dates. You asked me not to embarrass you by talking about my work in front of Ryan's colleagues." I gestured lightly toward the room. "Many of whom, as it turns out, now work for me." The weight of that truth hit the room like a stone dropped in water. I could see people frantically trying to replay the night in their heads, wondering just how offensive they might have been to the delusional old lady with business fantasies. Robert stepped forward again. "If I may add something," he said firmly. "Miss Parker has been incredibly gracious tonight. A lesser person might have been furious, deeply offended, by the comments made here." Emily's maid of honor, who had started the whole roast, looked like she wanted to sink straight through the floor. "But what I find most extraordinary," Robert went on, "is that Miss Parker was willing to endure public mockery rather than overshadow her daughter's wedding with news of her success. That is remarkable character, and remarkable love for her family." Emily now looked like she might cry, but not from joy. So I lifted the microphone one last time. "I hope you'll all forgive this dramatic revelation. It wasn't how I intended to spend the evening. But sometimes the truth finds its way out. And now," I looked at Emily with as much love as I could summon, "let's get back to celebrating this beautiful couple and their future together." I handed the microphone back to Robert and sat down. The chatter in the room slowly returned, but everything felt different now. People who had spent the evening patronizing me suddenly approached with brand new attitudes. "Miss Parker," said the man who had compared me to his crafting aunt, looking sheepish, "I owe you a huge apology. I had no idea. I mean, if I'd known." "It's fine," I told him gently. "Really?" But of course it wasn't fine for Emily. I could see her across the room, struggling with the weight of what she had just learned. When she finally came over, her eyes were red. "Mom, I don't even know what to say," she whispered. "I feel awful. About this speech. About how I've treated your work. About all of it." "Emily, sweetheart," I said softly, "it's your wedding day. Let's not let this ruin it. But I was awful to you, in front of everyone. And you just sat there and took it because you didn't want to ruin my moment. What kind of daughter does that make me?" "The kind," I said evenly, "who cared more about avoiding embarrassment than about understanding who I really am." I kept my voice steady but firm. Emily, you stood in front of 200 people and mocked me for refusing to act my age. You told everyone my dreams had expiration dates. That wasn't just a mistake. That was cruel. You weren't just wrong about the facts. You were willing to humiliate me rather than support me. And that's something we'll have to work through before things can feel normal again. The next morning, as Emily and Ryan left for their honeymoon, I knew things were never going to be the same. But maybe that wasn't a bad thing. I was 62 years old and I had finally stopped letting anyone else tell me what I was too old to accomplish. 6 months after the wedding, the ripple effects were obvious. Ryan had started calling me Miss Parker at family dinners and even asked for business advice. Turns out he was much more respectful once he realized his job security depended on staying in my good graces. Funny how that works. My sister stopped lecturing me about realistic expectations and instead started bragging to her friends about her successful entrepreneur sister. Amazing how fast people's tune changes once success becomes undeniable. As for Emily and me, that took longer. She came back from her honeymoon expecting everything to snap back to normal, but I stood firm with my boundaries. We even started family therapy. Yes, at 62 I dragged my 34-year-old daughter to counseling. Because being a powerful businesswoman doesn't just mean running companies. It means refusing to accept being treated poorly even by family. And the best part? 3 different wedding guests reached out afterward about consulting contracts. Apparently, being outed as a business powerhouse is excellent marketing. Who knew? As for Robert, he became one of my most trusted executives. Funny how some of the best business relationships begin with champagne and complete shock. These days, when people ask me about my late-life career change, I just smile. Because at 62, I've learned the single most important lesson in business and in life. Never underestimate a woman who's decided she's done being underestimated. So, that's my story. What do you think? Was Emily's public embarrassment at her own wedding justified payback? Or should I have handled things differently? Leave a comment and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like mine.